Let me show you two different methods of how to create this glass distortion effect in Photoshop. Let's jump straight in. The first step is going to be creating the texture that's going to act as the glass. So we're going to select our rectangle tool first off, and we're going to drag in a thin line from the top to the bottom. Make sure that this is sized correctly to the edge of the canvas. And what we're going to do is come over to the fill setting, select this gradient icon, and we want to create a white to grey fill. So we have solid white on the left-hand side, and on the right, we don't want this as solid black. We want it to be about midway between white and black on the hue scale. So if you use this color as a reference, that'll be ideal. Make sure that the angle is set to 0 degrees so that it's moving from left to right. And now all we're going to do is duplicate this, and we want this to fill up the whole page. So if we come to Command J, now hold Shift and drag that to align it. Select both, duplicate, and now repeat this until it fills up the whole canvas. Now once this has filled up the whole page, we're going to highlight every layer and we're going to group this. Now convert this layer to a smart object. You want to Command J to duplicate this, Command T and rotate this 90 degrees to fill up the rest of the page. See, if it doesn't fit to scale, you may have to duplicate this layer again like I do here. Drag this up to the top and then combine those layers together. So now that we have a horizontal and a vertical layer, we're going to come to the horizontal, select the layer mode, and we're going to come down to divide. You want each cube to have a gradient that kind of cuts in halfway across the cube. Diagonally is ideal. So you see how we've got this dark end gradient diagonally in the bottom corner and the white in the opposite one. Now once this is made, we need to save this as a Photoshop file to use it as a texture. So let's come up to File, Save As. Now I'm just going to save this as texture. Make sure that format is selected as Photoshop here and then save. Now group these two layers together and you can hide them. Okay, now with our texture now made, we can apply this to the image. So I'm going to paste in my image selection here. Now with this layer selected, I'm going to come up to Filter and Filter Gallery. Now we want to make sure that our effect is visible. So I'm going to make sure that this eye icon is selected here. And I'm going to come to Distort and Glass. Now I'm going to zoom out slightly on this preview so that we can see what we're working with. Now on the glass settings here, you can see this texture setting. You have 4 presets usually, but what we're going to be doing is uploading our texture file that we've just made by selecting these 3 lines and select Load Texture. Now we want to select the PSD file that we've just created and load. Now with this texture loaded, we can play around with the settings. So I'm going to increase the distortion up to around 18. And now I'm going to keep the smoothness setting quite low for this layer. I'm going to put it at 2, and you can see the kind of like sharpness of each of the cubes. You can also play around with the scaling to make the cubes smaller or larger. I'm going to put them slightly smaller, so I'll put them around 80%. Now that we have one layer applied, we want to come down to this plus icon and we want to apply the same texture again. With this one, we can increase the smoothness slightly. I'm going to keep it around 5 there. If I zoom in, you can see the reflection on each cube individually. Now I'm going to add in one more layer on this plus icon down here, and I'm going to come over to texture and I'm going to select grain. Now with this grain layer, we don't want this too intense, so I'm going to put it around 30 intensity and 50 contrast and then select OK. Now at this point, we have one layer with the texture applied. What we want to do is duplicate this layer that we've just made, and we're going to remove the filter gallery. So just right click and click Clear Smart Filters. Drag this below. And now with the effect layer selected, we're going to select M on our keyboard for the marquee tool, and I'm going to drag the selection, come down to our layers panel and select mask. Now our effect is nearly finished here. I'm just going to add in an adjustment layer. If I come down to adjustments and I'm going to select curves. I just want to increase the light values so that there is a little bit more reflection. You can see here as I drag this white slider up, creates a lot more light behind the effect. And there we go. That is option 1 complete. Let's jump into option 2. All right, now moving on to our second effect here. This is going to be a bit more of a glass morphism effect where it acts as a glass pane over the image. So the first step is going to be to bring in our image. Now we're going to come over to our rectangle tool, and I'm just going to create a selection over where I want the effect to be. So I'm just going to drag it over her eye here, and I'm going to select this corner circle and drag these in. Now I'm going to come over to the rectangle layer and come down to effects, and I'm going to be adding a stroke and an inner glow. Now the reason for doing this is to create almost a reflection around the outside of the shape. You can always alter this once the effect is viewable, and we can come back to that later on. I'm going to add a stroke and then just add in this inner glow. I'm going to put the opacity down to maybe 20 and keep the size to about 10. Now although you can't see this now, I will show you in a second. Now we can just collapse the effects here on the rectangle. We're going to select our image layer, duplicate this and drag this above. Now this is going to be the layer we apply the effects to, and then we're going to be clipping it to this rectangle. So the first thing is I'm going to come up to Filter, Blur and Gaussian Blur. I'm going to put the radius here around 30 pixels. Now with this blur applied, we're going to come up to Filter and Filter Gallery. Now similarly to the last effects, we're going to come up to Distort, select this glass icon, and now we want our texture to be tiny lens. And I'm going to increase the distortion here to about maybe 18 again. Now as I zoom out, you can see how much it's distorting this image, and you can see this kind of texture it's creating here. I'm going to increase the smoothness on this one to about 3, and I'm actually going to drag down the distortion slightly. Let's put it around 14 is fine. Now with this glass applied, I'm going to come in to add one more filter, which is going to be grain. So if I come down to the plus, I'm going to collapse these folders, come onto texture and select grain. Now this is quite an intense grain effect, so I'm going to drag this down to maybe about 20, and I'll keep the contrast where it is. Now select OK. Okay, now with this effect applied, all we need to do is come over to the image, right click on this and select create clipping mask. Now it's only going to apply to our rectangle shape that we've made before, and now you can see the effect outlines. What I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to remove the stroke and I'm going to add outer glow instead, so it's just so it's a bit smoother. So if I'm just going to hide that layer, come onto effects and outer glow here. Now increase the opacity and I'm going to bring down the spread and bring down the size. It's a little bit less of a harsh option compared to a stroke. And now that is our effect done. I'm just going to show you how you can move it around and reformat it to a different place on the image. I'm just going to collapse these effects here. Now with the rectangle selected, if you come up to the top left corner, you will most likely have auto select on. You need to uncheck this so that when you are hovering on this layer specifically, it will not select anything above it. So I'm going to select this rectangle and I can just drag this around. Now what's great about this effect is I can come back onto the rectangle and alter the effects on this, and I can also come back onto the image file, select filter gallery, and I can edit all of the effect values that we've already input. And that's our final effect. YouTube, as always, thank you so much for watching until the end. I'm glad I can be helpful to you, and stick around for more content like this. Make sure to subscribe, it will really help me out, and I'll see you in the next one.